Um, yeah, great to be here, Jamie. How are you doing?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to have this session together. I've been a big fan of everything that you've been doing in the space for a while. I think you're one of the few artists that's continuously pushing the boundaries of the medium. I think in terms of not just Web3 but music in general. You've been, I'd say, an early adopter to the space in many ways, and many of your projects have always, like I said, just pushed the boundaries and really tried to, I guess, show the potential of what the technology can do as an artist, as well as building communities around it. So yeah, super excited to kind of go into this, learn more about how you started in the industry, and also yeah, just kind of where the future's going, and of course also talk about what we're building together. So why don't we jump in? Like, how did you get into Web3? What was the first starting point?
There's kind of like a few versions of that. I mean, the first person to ever be like, you should do this, was Chloe J, who was like working on my management team at the time, and she introduced me to like a bunch of stuff that people were doing, and kind of planted the seed. And then then I guess the thing that kind of actually made me take the leap and make a wallet and all those things was Water and Music, which is like a music research community. So they had a token drop, and that they did a tutorial on how to make a wallet, and that was how I made my first wallet. And then there was just some musical stuff. Artists called Black Dave, Daniel Allen, did a mirror fund. Like people doing some stuff that had like real like interesting uses, piqued my interest, and yeah, I could start to see people do things with different forms of media, and that was exciting for me.
How many years ago was this?
I think 2 or 3. Yeah, so not early in crypto people's terms, but maybe
Hmm.
like early in the music thing. Like I caught that early sound wave as like like as like a someone watching it happen. Like collecting, and in the meantime, just started doing my own drops, and kind of very early started thinking like, what can I do differently to everyone else, and that was
Hmm.
kind of how I got going.
And what do you think it was that really attracted you to like the potential of like the blockchain and kind of everything that the technology was promising?
Initially, it was I guess initially it was just uh, a place where there was no rules in certain ways. I don't mean that in terms of like legal framework, but in terms of the medium, the scene, the culture. I was so used to doing the kind of Spotify pitch and the out now videos, and like all that stuff started to feel really repetitive. And yeah, it was just like a really interesting place where I could combine different mediums, artworks. The first pieces I did were videos, were like artist collaboration with a director. And it was just interesting to me that I could take these two things that in other places were separated, put them into one place, and people could buy or collect. Yeah, could buy and collect it in a way that respected the relationship, between the music and the visuals.
Yeah, that's cool. And how long have you been making music for?
I've been making music a long time, yeah. Well, like that classic story of, as a teenager, I was in a band. And then I got into producing, and I was doing like a lot of hip hop, and I got pulled into like the pop music industry in the UK, after sort of self-releasing for quite a few years, like me and my friend putting out vinyls and selling them shop to shop. And I did the kind of pop writer thing for quite a long time, and had, yeah, an amazing time. But at the end of the day, so little of your work was released, and for me that ended up not being something I was happy about. Like I wanted to come out and release music after doing that for 10 years and be in control of whether the music came out. And that's when I started Sound of Fractures.
Very cool. And what's your, like, how do you feel being an artist in this sort of time that we're living in? I know you've got some really interesting and quite like deep, I would say deep, like well kind of researched thoughts in many ways around artistry and the kind of changing digital landscape that we're living in. Like, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like just being an artist in this sort of generation, and the pros, the cons of it. Like, where's your head at?
Oh man, I mean, it's so complicated at the moment. I think like I would always preface any thoughts with the fact that there's always like unicorn cases, right? There's always going to be like independent artists that build good teams and build careers. There's always going to be people that pop off due to viral stuff. But My interest is more kind of about everyone else. Like, like what is this thing as a career? I work with like a lot of young people, so I do some teaching. Like I have a lot of friends who are artists, and I've become very interested in like, I guess what I call like building a life around music. And like Sound of Fractures is kind of like an experiment in that. It's like what happens if you build like a constellation of different things around the music, but you think much more like proactively about how they feed into each other. So, like the work I do outside of music, like how does that help me make contacts for my music? And the projects and the experiments I run, like I've started writing about them, and how does that lead to me getting speaking engagements, and how do those speaking opportunities allow me to meet new artists, and thinking much more about like my life as like an artist, instead of me having like this like cool music output and then all this other stuff I have to do when it's not earning enough, right? Like what is Sound of Fractures as like a lifestyle for me, and like a network of things that are all have value and all feed into each other. And that is, I guess, like part of my thesis of where we're at, right? Which is like, yeah, I think that is normal, and moving away from that idea that we have like of feeling some kind of shame of the other things that we do, and maybe being more proactive about these other things that we do and how they feed into it. So, you
Mm.
know, advertising models, platformization, whatever you call it, and shitification, all that stuff is a massive mess, right? Like really what it comes down to is, yes, you can play the game, yes, you can get short-term success, but none of the players in those ecosystems are incentivized to build long-term artist careers. And arguably there's too many artists, right? Like I'm aware of that, but I still think like response to that shouldn't be just always to play the game, because in the way that the platforms push you to play it, right? I think you have to do a bit of everything, and I'm trying to think more about like what is the sustainable long-term goal rather than the short-term fix, right? The dopamine here, which is hard, right? Because we're in a landscape where everything is about now, 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 and numbers.
Mm.
But we're just starting to hit like this kind of, in the same way they're just starting to hit like this plateau of like streaming and subscriptions. We're hitting this like plateau of like sustainable music careers based on viral content, right? Like people are blowing up, they're getting their first few viral hits, and they're being like, oh, I thought when I did that, I would be cool. But now I've got to make another one of those every week, right? Like, and then I've got to go negotiate brand deals and somehow like fit that brand deal into my content, but the content still has to be good. And we're just hitting that point now where like, yeah, that kind of, we all thought we could get a viral thing and that would be it, right? But now we're like 5 years into this, we're seeing that that's not really the case, right? Like you're getting on a treadmill that's incredibly intense, and the competition's going up, and it's getting more saturated, and selling short courses and doing like brand endorsements. For some people are doing great, right? But like, is it a replacement for like wanting to do music? We don't know. Like for some people, yeah, some people are like, yeah, the music doesn't matter, I'm just making content. But
Mm.
others are like, I want to be making music that connects and resonates deeply, and really those kind of like dream careers that we see. At least maybe it's a generational thing, but like going on tour, headlining, that kind of stuff doesn't always come from this kind of like social media game. You can just get
Mm.
stuck in the social media game, which you can earn loads of money from, but it's just like a question of what do you want.
What do you think are some of the keys to like getting towards a more sustainable music career? Like you said, there's no one path. I think, generally speaking, right? Everyone can get there in their own way, but like, what are some of the things that you believe are like crucial for an artist to be thinking about in order to really build a sustainable career around music and their artistic identity?
You can't get away from the simple things, right? Which is like building connections with people, right? And how to do that in this world is really hard. But like at the very base level, I would say is like building connections with people. Call it community building, call it what you want, but essentially being the artist that has a stronger connection with your audience than others, or like finding those like touch points that make you you, and like building connections off them. And I would say probably the other one is like, in terms of sustainability, is probably like being a part of a scene, or helping like facilitate the growth of a scene, right? Like it's the idea of like nurturing and growing things, right? Like nurturing community, like growing a scene, being a part. Because if you're a part of a community of creators, you've got like a bunch of people who are championing you the whole time, right? And
Mm.
and you're getting more than just financial gains from that. You're getting like personal gains in terms of like people to work with, other people to share the journey with. And you're also getting like that network effect of like the algorithm, people sharing your music, people to collaborate with, people to lift each other up. And I mean, it's hard because we're all just, we're designed or like we're programmed by music industry to be like solo and on your own and like do your own thing and like but those things I still think are like central. If you look at big influencers, even that's central to their way of working is like
Mm.
those connections with the people,
Yeah,
their audience.
no, I agree. I think being part of a scene is definitely one of the most important pieces, like you said, because then if you find that tribe that resonates with you artistically and creatively, like everyone collaborates together, they sort of work together to kind of push each other up, and it definitely has definitely pays dividends. I think, like you said, personally as well as commercially over time, right? If it cuts through. Who are some of the artists and scenes that you look up to, that you're inspired by, or you're generally just like a fan of?
I think it goes in phases, like I almost have like two lanes, right? Like, or maybe multiple lanes of inspiration. Like I'm very inspired by like non-music creators, you know, um, my friend, I guess, Black Dave has introduced me to a lot of like Virgil Abloh's ways of thinking that I've like got really into in terms of like what is like a multidisciplinary creator. And I guess people like Kanye have kind of touched on that before, and Tyler. So I find that really interesting. Musically, I'm very into like UK dance music. Like I think like people like Overmono. I'm listening to quite a lot of Two Shell at the moment. I'm listening to quite a lot of Max Cooper and Leon Vinehall, just like, things that bring like analog or, kind of like emotional like edge into music. And then I think the other thing that I found really inspiring over the last year is people like Imogen Heap and Matt Dryhurst and Holly Herndon. And actually, I would put, there's a UK thinker, artist, producer called Elijah that I'm really into. People that are just sort of building really interesting, different careers that have like music at the center of it, but aren't necessarily trying to play this like, did I get in the playlist game? And that's really interesting to me. I guess even people like Brian Eno, right? Like, they're the people I'm kind of looking at the moment for inspiration because they're building these like really interesting worlds around their interests, their identity. Yeah, so it's a
I
mixed
love
pot.
that. I mean, yeah, and I love that. The people you mentioned, like Imogen, Elijah, Brian Eno, like Holly Herndon, Matt Dryhurst, like they stand for something, in my opinion, that's so much more than just music as well, right? They have like a cause in some ways that sort of drives them to kind of exist and push things forward. Like Elijah is, he's become such an amazing voice for independent underground music culture, grime, black music, and then even more broadly just like music as a whole. And the way he's kind of built a brand around sharing his message and kind of educating people with a really interesting social friendly format but still has so much value in it is incredible. And then similar to like Imogen or Holly Herndon, like they're trying to do something that ultimately pushes the space forward and creates a more equitable landscape for artists rather than just solely focusing on their own creative outputs to some extent. And
Right,
so it
they're
creates a
creating
much
their own
more
path.
interesting space. Mm,
Yeah, they're creating new paths, new lanes, right? And
mm,
I would put like Verite in that as well, right? Someone else
mm,
that I listen to a lot and find really interesting, and Dowda, who is more well known for looking after Grimes, right? But like his
mm,
thinking and a lot of the stuff that he talks about, I find really interesting. People talked about it. Someone said to me, a friend of mine said to me, it's like sending exploration out into the unknown, right? Like back in the day, they used to go exploring without knowing what they were going to find, right? To bring back the riches of wherever, probably that they were conquering or whatever. But that kind of like idea of like people who are just experimenting, really simple, just being like, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to try a bunch of stuff. Um, and that's really interesting to me.
yeah, I think it's needed as well, right? Like the music industry is in a very interesting and constantly changing space. Like the trends are kind of like changing at such a rapid pace. You've got TikTok, which is kind of creating its own little bubble of music consumption. And now with the rise of AI, there's also this, some people think existential threat for the music industry that's sort of coming up that may just lead to so much more saturation. Like the number of songs produced is going to increase exponentially. And, I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on that. Like, what do you think about the future of music, and how do things like AI play into like, the utopia or the dystopia that may be emerging? Like, yeah, how do you feel about, the advent of AI and its impact on the music industry more broadly?
I don't think anyone has an answer. I don't think anyone should have an answer, right? I think like we are heading into like a pretty unknown territory. If you look at like streaming models, they are already oversaturated. So if you subscribe to the theory that that's going to get worse, um, it's going to get worse. I'm not entirely convinced that, it seems logical that Spotify and those platforms will prioritize cheaper music, cheaper to make music because their profit margins are higher. But it doesn't really serve the branding and identity of the platforms very well. And whether or not that is a factor in whether people want to pay for it, we kind of don't know yet, right? Like, will Spotify just become like ambient background listening in 5 to 6 years' time and be largely like AI music? I'm not sure. I'm not really sure about that. I think the major labels have too much of an investment in that to really let that happen. Um, so I don't think there's a clear answer to that. I think we're seeing some really interesting ideas around like ownership of like IP and algorithms, like people training models off their data. And, I'm very skeptical as to like whether or not this kind of like CCO path will work. Like, I mean, in terms of like whether it will become a reality, I think it's much more likely that Sonar and all these, places will just do deals with major labels, because
Mm.
that is a precedent that's just been set by history ever since the invention of copyright, right? Is that it doesn't serve their purpose to be at war. It does now because it gets them a better negotiating position, but I don't think all copyright law is going to get thrown out the window all of a sudden. But who knows with what's happening in America?
No,
Maybe some pressure from Elon might do
no,
something
I
crazy.
agree. I agree. I don't think that the creative industry will stand for it, and if it continues to kind of move in that direction, and ultimately, cannibalizes people's work, or just very
Mm.
obviously infringes on people's copyright in such a blatant way. I don't think it's going to be something that people will just stand by and allow. I've seen a lot of amazing companies, not just what like Holly Herndon's doing or what Imogen's doing, but there's a
Yeah.
number of other companies that are also, and creators, thinking about like attribution and new business models and commercial models to think about AI that can at least create a more transparent way for people to understand,
Right.
like if their content's being used and how it could be licensed within these systems and more. And I think blockchain can play a key role in that as well, right? In the background as a system for managing, protecting, monetizing people's intellectual property.
Yes.
To me, it was
Definitely.
the reason that I was excited about the blockchain maybe 8 years ago when I first got into this space. I read a research paper about rights on the blockchain and how it could untangle all this fragmentation that exists in the music industry and just unlock a new way for people to get deals done more effectively and to collaborate in a much more free and open format while still being able to share in value. And it was like, yeah, this feels like it solves so many issues. But it's interesting kind of looking at where we are now and like how much progress has actually been made. Like, is there really mass adoption yet? Is there infrastructure that's being kind of adopted by the music industry en masse, or where do we sit? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, how do you feel about the progress that the blockchain industry has made in terms of driving adoption, and what are some of the hurdles or positives that you might be looking at?
I think we are getting way closer to the blockchain as a tool set, right? Like a functioning tool set in terms of like cost, in terms of like function. Um, maybe in terms of like risk management of like how to negotiate and deal with some of the risks involved as users, and how to
Mm,
guide people through that. I mean, we're seeing like a host of apps that are, like in my opinion, sometimes being too quick to chase the models that are out there already. Like in terms of like the way that, virality algorithm feeds and all those things. But it kind of makes sense. That's where people's heads are at in terms of users. But we are seeing things that feel like a game, right? Like I can go on wow.xyz as I was the last couple of days and having a look and exploring that whole world of like making meme coins and things. And, you know, it felt like a game, you know, like it was quick, it was easy, it was simple, you know, the same with Zora, the same with some other places. So the front end side is becoming a bit more like fun. I'm not, you know, like I'm not sure we're at a point yet where we can really like make a judgment on like, are they better yet? But they offer some differences and they kind of offer some cool communities. And on the back end, we're getting some really interesting stuff, right? In terms of like splits, in terms of like distribution, you know, like in terms of like, you know, for streaming, like tracking data and IP and, you know, like what we're doing with the remixes on Chorus, you know, like allowing fans, you know, for me as an artist, if someone remixes my song, or I remix their song, either way, they have to account to me legally forever, right? So if I do a song, I put it on Believe Digital, wherever I'm distributing, and there's no splits on that platform, which are a lot of them there aren't, and the remix does whatever, a couple 100,000 streams or maybe more over time, that's like very incremental, right? You know,
Mm,
so legally they can invoice whatever I set the invoice period, but they invoice me every quarter or every, you know, half a year, they could be invoicing me for like £5.36, right? Or naught, and in 4 years' time, $0.0047. Whether they will or not, we don't know. But technically, they can ask me to account for that song. I have to go into my DSPs, my streaming, my digital distributor, look at how much that song has earned in that period, and they have to invoice me and I have to pay them that money, right? And as my career progresses and my catalog grows, if I'm an independent artist and I'm managing multiple people remixing my songs and vice versa, and I want to do it properly without buyouts, that's really, really complicated. And if you add into like what we're trying to do, which is like, how do I invite my fans to play with the music, right? And how do I let them put that out in the world in a way that I can be remunerated in some way for those interactions, and maybe they can too. The current system is just not set up to do that. Right? You have to start again and build from
mm,
scratch because the back end of these platforms has been built for a very specific use, which is largely for labels, and then they've adapted that for independent artists as distribution models have changed. And now, you know, maybe they will adapt. It's not impossible. It's just, are they incentivized to do that? Clearly, they're not. So,
mm,
you know, like some of these new places, you know, like Core Protocol and what Relevator Labs are doing and things, are actually starting to offer like a reason, you know, like a way that we could do this and add in, like you said, add in like AI collaboration, you know, the
mm,
model people are building based on their data. It's all getting very complicated. And
mm,
the
mm.
blockchain really does have a very strong argument for being the place to do that
Yeah,
or to
what I'm
deal with
really
that.
excited about is how the ecosystem is starting to form, right? Like across a number of companies, like you mentioned, between what we're doing with partners like Revelator, with Mintangible. Each of these are bringing their own tools and technologies into the value chain. And for an artist, then it gives you almost like this full suite where you can kind of use all these different tools as you need and sort of build up like the modular toolkit to kind of suit
Mm,
your distribution strategy, your community engagement plan, your monetization plan, and underpinned with like blockchain technology that largely is in the background, right? It's there just to
right,
facilitate the important transactional things that are going on, but actually there's products now that people can use without needing to really worry too much about like what exactly is happening in the background. It just does
right.
the basics that you're looking for. I wanted to jump to hear a little bit around your scenes project, because I think it leads us nicely into what we're doing together on Chorus as well. It was one of the most exciting projects I think in the space in terms of vision, and just continues to, I guess, show how you're constantly thinking about innovation and kind of using the medium to kind of push the boundaries of expression and community engagement. Tell us about scenes and what the project is, and what you were aiming to achieve from it. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So Scenes was born out of a conversation which is just about the value of music, right? We're talking about like how, and one of the things that we like, I always felt strongly about, and most people feel strongly about, is that it's very the untangible thing that music does is emotional connection, right? Which is then spun into something that is maybe it's a purchase, maybe it's, like a fandom. We don't know, right? But one of the things that I was like, undoubtedly we could be sure of is that it soundtracks our life, right? Its problem is that we're in a visual world and music isn't a visual medium. And simply because of that, it soundtracks our other senses, right? So we get married, we go raving, we hang out with our friends, we break up with our partners, we get together with our partners, or friendships, whatever they might be. And quite often music are attached to those memories, right? Like music attached to those moments. So the idea of scenes was kind of like, how do I create that connection? And we came up with this idea, which was a simple thing of like, how do I get you to think of a memory while you're listening to the music? So I built this platform where each song kind of had like a concept based on what I wrote it about. And you would go to the platform and you would log in and you would listen to the song. And as you were listening to it, it would present you with a question, a prompt, which would be to elicit a memory. So it would be like, what is something you wish you'd said to somebody but never have, right? And something that would make you take you back, take you to a place. And in that process, you're listening to the music. The question would be like, is a memory made? Or is like a connection made? And you would respond to the question with a photo and some text. And I would create a unique piece of artwork for every person as like a memento, like something to digitally take home. And it was all kind of like branded and tied into the identity of the project. And for each of the songs, one of these pieces of artwork would be chosen to be the main artwork of the main single. So all of this would happen before the song came out. So it was kind of playing with like, what happens if you take this community and give them access to your world before the rest of the world, like in a community building kind of way. And also just see what that does. Do people then want to go and buy the record? Do they want to like post it in public? Do they want to tell a friend to come and take part? Or do they just like remember me more than other people? We didn't know, like I didn't know, so it was an ongoing like journey, and every song had one of these like submission rounds, we called it, and that went for the whole album, like 6 singles. And by the end of it, there was like 400 memories that I had to make by hand, and they formed this like gallery of all these emotional moments. And it became really interesting because other people would see them and they were quite anonymized. So people would think it would remind other people of other memories. So it's kind of like passing the buck. And now we're turning it into a book. So there's going to be like a book called Prompts to Reflect, and a selection of these memories that are co-created like with my audience or community or fans, or like a mix of all these different types of people who are just like interested in the project, to go out in the world. And the idea is it's a postcard book that you can give one to a friend. And, if you go and check it out, you'll see they say things like, you were the person that made me feel like this, or, um, after I met you, I never looked back. There's lots of like deep emotional ones. There were some really sad ones. There were some really beautiful ones. So it's kind of like an experiment it's a world building experiment. What happens if you take this idea that I had for a record and you build a world around it that involves other people? And that was like, that was the experiment. Well, I didn't know it was going to be the experiment. That's what it ended up being.
I think it's super cool. I love the participation element of it, and like there's so many layers of like concept and personal storytelling, and like you said, world building, but also just to me like the medium and the canvas that you're playing with is just much broader than a traditional release. And I think that way of thinking is just really exciting. And I see you very much as an artist and technologist, right, in many ways, because you're sort of blurring the lines between the two. You're very much thinking about things in like a product centric way to some extent, right? But also at the same time, it's driven by like this artistic identity that you have. And I think it's super unique. It's the kind of approach that I think is what's needed to kind of push the space forward, and for people to like, again, just like, take advantage of the tools and technologies, and just, express and, build communities and build value around their music. I want to jump to Korus and what we're doing together.
Sure.
I'm going to share my screen and use this to just do a little demo. So yeah, I'm super excited about this. First of all, it's an absolutely beautiful track that we that you've brought into the platform. And for those who don't know, Korus is an interactive remix platform. We work with artists across the board who will basically bring a project into the platform, which includes their visuals as well as their stem files from the song. And you can basically remix those together to create your own version of it. So we collaborate on this with your one of your latest singles that's coming out called My Love for You. I'll show a quick demo of it, and then I'd love to just hear your thoughts about, why you're excited about testing these kinds of models, and what you think the future of this can look like. So the way it works is really simple. I've just loaded up some of the visuals and also got the stems up here. And when I click start, I can mute and unmute the sweat stems. I can swap them around, and I can also perform between the visual clips as well. Super fun. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Jamie, and yeah, why you're excited about bringing your music into Korus, and what you thought about it when you first saw the platform, and more.
I mean, one of the problems that music has is its medium, right? So I think what's interesting to me is I just done this project which is about collaborating using memories and around listening to music, and it was an opportunity to take that and do that with the music. So like, what happens if you turn the music into a game? You let in an interesting way, the same way that kind of like when ChatGPT came out, it was seen as like this kind of like alien life form, but now we're seeing it as like this productivity tool, right? This thing that we can play with and like use alongside our life. And I think that the idea of what we're doing with the Chorus Drop is it does a bit of both of those things, right? It allows my brother who doesn't make music to play with a song, right? And just like a game. And just like, what happens if like I can interact with this thing, right? Instead of being served it and just expected to listen, I can play with this thing. I can take ownership over the things that I do. I can save my version. I can do something with it, right? But also like the producer community, right? It's like having sample packers that you can play with it. You can mess around with it. You can export it. You can chop it up. You can use it as like a, like a collaborative partner, or, like a plugin, in the sense of like, to bounce ideas off. And I think it's what Splice was doing anyway, right? Like people like to paint it as hugely different. It's not hugely different. There's still essentially like a place you can go to get the musical components and play with them. And this like allows someone like me to, like, for want of a better word, like gamify the music, right? Like turn music into a game that I can play with my audience and do some cool stuff, right? Like if something connects, like we can take one of the versions, which we're going to do, and release it, right? And give, like an interesting way of collaborating, which is like a goal. And the other important thing is a place for people to share what they make, right? Like a point of connection. It's just like, here's what I did, here's what I did. Here's what happened when I tried this. Here's what happened when I tried this. And it's inclusive because it can include people who aren't producers, and it's like usable for producers. So for me, that's like an important next experiment for music, right? Which is like what happens when we collaborate with our audience. And that's something I've played with loads. And collaborating doesn't mean to say like you have to make 100 singles with 100 people. Collaboration is about being, it's like a virtual studio, a virtual writing session where not everyone has to be present and everyone can play, everyone can share what they do. And it can just be a point of connection, like a point of conversation. It doesn't have to be more than that. And there is also this beautiful side of it, which it can be more than that, right? It allows people if we want to, and when we do release versions, and everyone to be remunerated, and for my input into that engine to be recognized, like in terms of like technically recognized on the back end, and for their contribution to be recognized. That's fun, right? Like, that's a game, right? If they make something, if someone makes something, we release it. The reality is that we're looking for ways to make music interesting, and we have collaborated. They will see some income from that. I will see some income from that. And that's a really interesting first step in what do we do with music next that allows it to, yeah, we've seen how, successful gaming has been, right? Can't get away from that. And I think that's interesting, right? Social media doesn't allow us to collaborate in that way. We collaborate very much on the terms of the algorithm and the
Mm.
platform, what serves that platform. And something like this, to me, brings back a more human element to it, like more of a conversational side.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it on many levels. As you mentioned, I think it's a really fun new format to kind of put your music into, and it turns it into an interactive experience that's not like just passive listening, which is nothing wrong with passive listening, but does it get people to feel a closer connection to the song? And you also get some interesting insights then, like what kind of vibe are are the fans really excited
Yeah.
about when they take the song into a few different directions, or which section of the song really stood out for them that you see them just jamming and playing on certain aspects more. So I think there's a lot of fun between not only like the format of just making music more interactive, but also the data and insights that you get from your community around like what they really like and what kind of vibe they're excited about. But then also, like you mentioned the potential business model aspects of it as well, because it's like selling a stem pack, except because it's on the blockchain, you also get to monetize from the usage of it. So if
Right.
someone's making music on these and you've allowed those to be released or to be commercialized, you get paid on the back end. And we can use some of the latest tools like our partnership with Revelator and others to just fulfill that. So you have this sort of next generation technology plugging into the traditional streaming platforms, or plugging into the traditional distribution systems, and all the metadata is intact. So you don't have to hope someone's manually going to fill in the right information and manage splits in the right way. It's just all encoded as part of the core experience. So I think there's so much that can come from it. I also love your point about gamifying music, because I think those kinds of ideas are the things that just make it more immersive, make it more personalized, and give people something to kind of almost work towards to some extent, right? Gaming is so good at like points and leaderboards, and making it a little bit of a friendly competition. Like, again, there's all of these tools at your disposal as an artist to then play with and choose to engage your community however you see fit. But yeah, I'm super excited about it.
Me too.
Um, I know we're gonna carry on a few more conversations. We're probably gonna do another one with a few of the other artists all together. And so I
Cool.
just wanted to close this off first of all by thanking you for joining us. And
No problem.
I'm super hyped around the partnership that we have in the long term. This is just like one of the first steps, I think, of stuff we're doing together. For those who don't know, we have a really special drop taking place from the 20th of November that includes Sound of Fractures track, Imogen Heap's latest single, Richie Houghton Plastic Man's song, as well as an exclusive soundtrack that has been made for the Black Mirror franchise with an artist called Dixon. And all of these will be launched as remix packs, where you get the stems, you get some VJ clips, and you get to remix them in chorus on the platform. And yeah, just really excited to have such an incredible group of artists who are all excited about just pushing the format, pushing the industry forward, trying to find new ways to engage their fans, and ultimately trying to reimagine the way the music industry expresses itself, monetizes, and ultimately grows. So, Jamie, thank you for taking the time out to chat with us today. And yeah, looking forward to the next few weeks and for this drop, and of course, everything else coming up. Anything you want to share as a final note?
No, looking forward to it too. Yeah, the first part of the single comes out this week, so people can live with the song for a bit, and then we're going to open up the ability to collaborate. So yeah, usual. Follow me on socials, SO Fractures, and tune in, take part, and come play the game.